I think that that's so valid and fair. And it's really interesting because in this encyclical, he also talks about the relationship between church and technology and development, and how the church welcomes technology and development, and how it's important to drive societies forward, but it's also important to think about the impact on humanity and the role of humans and human relationships.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Everyday Data, where we examine currently trending topics in data, analytics, and AI, and how they show up in our everyday lives. We're your hosts, Patricia and Zacc, MSP AI grads from NYU and data and pulp culture enthusiasts. And today, in this week's show, we have breaking news. Well, not really breaking news, but just current news. And that is the new document, the Magnifica Humanitas, that I'm probably butchering a little bit, that was just released yesterday by Pope Leo the 14th. And we are going to talk about that today, what it means for us as people, what it means maybe from a business context, and what the whole document is. It's a super long document. We're going to definitely lean on Patricia's expertise because she's read most of it, whereas I have just read some of the news summaries because, yes, it's in like 4 or 5 different articles on New York Times. But I'm going to use this as a segue to, speaking of New York Times, which I am chronically addicted to refreshing. Patricia, what have you noticed this week in the news?
I have a fun story for today. I think it's fun. Actually, it's kind of sad, but I think it's also kind of funny. So Glendale Community College in the US, for their grad ceremony, they used an AI-powered name-calling system, and it skipped over 100 grad names during the event. And then it skips the names, and then the school officials were like, we're not going to let the students cross the stage again, which is so sad. So then the crowd starts booing during the ceremony. Like, everybody was so upset and creating such a ruckus that eventually the officials like let the students cross the stage again, and then just had a human reading the names. So once again, humans win over AI.
Yeah, and this is one of those things. I mean, I read this too because there's a ton of stories about AI. This is graduation season. I currently work in higher ed, so I hear about the news a lot, and just a lot of the speakers, of course, commencement speakers talking about AI, or these tech AI CEOs getting booed. But like this story, it's a case of, why do you need AI in the first place? Like, you're taking the name reader's job. Like, yeah, I feel this is the especially for higher ed, like a college. I mean, it's Glendale, it's a community college. So, okay, I don't want to throw shade, but community college, slightly smaller, not as prestigious as like a 4-year university, maybe less resources. So I'm giving them the benefit of the doubt that they're trying to optimize, make the most of their budget as a community college, but still, the human element of teaching, that's like fundamental to teaching, I feel. And yeah, sad story.
Yeah, limits does exist. Not everything has to be AI just because it can
Right?
be AI.
Yes. Yeah, so I wanted, my news story is, I wanted to talk about those commencement speakers as well, but I think that's, we'll don't throw any more shade on higher ed. But the other fun story about AI is also a backlash of AI story that I have. And that was from yesterday. Today, 2 days ago. Today is the 28th as recording. Came out on the 26th. And that was the news from TechCrunch that DuckDuckGo installs jumped 30% as frustration with Google's AI search grew. And this is an article just highlighting an increase of DuckDuckGo. It's a website search engine, so it's a competitor to Google, and they're known for privacy and just being slightly different than Google, so they use a different algorithm. And most importantly is they do not use AI in their search results, at least yet. I think that they're trying to be a differentiator, but the Google themselves have now, if of course, I'm sure most of us watching this, listen to this, are Google users. It's just ubiquitous. But the Google search engine, also a news story, they officially added the AI mode as like the top results. Before it was like an opt-in, now it's become the default. It was also a news story that they're one of their first times finally ever changing the Google search box and the homepage. But this news is an interesting backlash to AI, or rebuttal of AI, because people are choosing. You do have choice still, even though Google is the monopoly. People are choosing to have non-AI search results even on the web.
Once again, AI loses. But I get it. Honestly, like lately, every time I do a Google search, I get really annoyed because it's not what I wanted, or even the results these days just don't feel like they're actually very good results.
Yeah.
So I think Google's got to rethink some things there. So maybe I'm about to become one of those DuckDuckGo downloaders.
Yeah. I mean, I've noticed that because of just availability, it's built in Chrome, for example, I'll sometimes pull up the Gemini and the search bar to ask about something. And when I do, I immediately regret it because Gemini, at least the version that they have in the search bar, it's pretty bad. Like the results compared to using such as like the frontier models from OpenAI, it's bad. And then when that is now, as you mentioned, the default result of your search engine, it just increases that frustration. So yeah, I think this is a bad just marketing move on Google. I know they're trying to be all in AI first because it's the demand, but as we're seeing, there's also some AI backlash, and I think maybe they need to rethink maybe some of the back to their roots.
And if you're more interested in hearing about search and AI, that was our episode that we released last
Yes.
week. So
Yes, go check it
come
out.
check out our last episode. It's all about search and AI and the future of the relationship between search and AI. So you can learn a little bit more about that in that episode. So check it out.
But on that note of what is we talking about this episode? So as we teed up a little bit today, we're going to be talking about the recent news about the papal new encyclical. So I'm going to pass it over to Patricia to tee this up as our quasi expert this week of this. So Patricia, what are we talking about today?
Yeah, so we are talking about Pope Leo's first encyclical, which is called Magnifica Humanitas. And it really is about like humans' relationship with AI. And I'll get into some of the key highlights, but I just want to preface by saying I think regardless of whether you are religious or not, I think we're in an interesting time where there's just lots of thought pieces and conversations happening around AI, and they're happening from corporations, they're researchers, there's governments, and I think now we have like a major religious institution that's getting added to the conversation, and I'm sure that we will see more coming out from other religious leaders. And so I think it's important that we take in every opinion. And I know that you and I, as soon as we heard this news story, were like, well, we got to get behind this because this is hot. This is hot news. This is the Pope, right? Such a large world leader. And so I know that we felt like we wanted to add our addition to the AI conversation, and kind of share our opinions and reactions to this encyclical. So obviously I read most of it. I don't think I read like the last little bit. I really tried to consume as much of it as I could, but there's only so much I can do, okay? But here are some key highlights from the encyclical. I would honestly suggest reading it. Like, I am not Catholic, although I am I'm Christian, so it's pretty adjacent. But I thought it was really interesting. And basically, some of the highlights is that Pope Leo covers general AI and basically how to build and utilize AI while making sure to keep human dignity, which is a concept that comes up a lot within the encyclical, at the center. And he suggests using the principles of the social doctrine, which I think is like a Catholic framework for basically building a just society that's rooted in human dignity and the common good. And so he kind of goes through, there's different principles. So the principles that he goes through the principle of common good, which is basically like naming AI power imbalances and monopolies. So, making sure that everyone is working towards the common good in terms of those who are in power when it comes to AI. He talks about this concept, the principle of universal destination of goods. So basically making sure that there's equitable access to technology and education around AI. He talks about the principle of subsidiarity, so making sure that we continue to have like a community-based decision-making and driving that. He also talks about the principle of solidarity, so just kind of recognizing and valuing all of the different types of labor that goes into tech and AI and maintaining it, building it, bringing it to life. And then finally, he talks about the principle of justice and basically making sure that we can challenge if there's any unequal global control over AI. So those are the main principles that he goes through. He also touches on things like AI usage in warfare and who's responsible for that and how that responsibility can't just be delegated to machines. And he also talks about how AI could potentially diminish human judgment and relationships. So a lot of topics that he goes through, and I think I've just covered them. Like, this is like high level. So if you want to read a little bit more, like Zacc mentioned, there's so many articles out there where you can get a little bit more of an in-depth detail, or just read the actual encyclical itself, and we will link it in all of the places that we post this podcast. So if you want to give it a read, you should absolutely do that. So just based on kind of the articles that you've read, Zacc, and a little bit of the recap that I've given, what are your first impressions or reactions on some of the themes, the topics, having this religious leader be part of the conversation? What are your initial thoughts?
Yeah. So I think the most interesting thing, or the part that makes, like the main takeaway for someone who's, just from a business perspective, regardless of what your stance is Catholicism, it's looking at 1.4 billion people. So it's a large denomination. And as Patricia, you just mentioned, like, this is just the first leader of a large, I'm sure there's maybe even someone of a smaller, maybe sect of some sort of religion around the world, but he is a leader of a large swath of the world, especially in English speaking world. So it is significant in that sense of someone that people look to for guidance. And that's what this is. As you mentioned, those like just takeaways, it's more of a guiding principle. And to me, it's something what we talked about in the news story, we talked about all the time, is keeping a human in the loop. And I think that was the main idea that at least that I took away from, again, only reading New York Times, and I read 4 or 5, because there's a ton just on New York Times, had 4 or 5 takeaway articles and analysis. But it's keeping AI and the human in the loop, and not, I mean, I guess you could look at it from a religious standpoint that you don't want to worship AI, but it's also just don't take away the human. So the church itself, if you're familiar with church, it's in stories. You've just you're always passively familiar, but they are working for the good of humanity, obviously using a religion as a vehicle. But if you think of just the idea of a church of giving to the poor, taking care of the sick, to me, this lines up with that, in the sense that, because like you said, one of the articles or one of the points you mentioned was jobs and warfare and keeping humans in this, that so I think it's a forward-thinking document, and again, that guiding principle that it could go out of control, if we let AI take over our lives. And he's just giving that guidance to his followers, to his leaders, the other people in the church as a whole, that, okay, just it's here. You can't really put the genie back in the bottle, but let's try and work with it almost. That's what I think I took away the most, and from a high level.
100%. I agree with you. I think as well, I found that if you really touched a lot on this concept of morality and human morality, and you and I have kind of touched on this in past episodes, where I think it's something that we talk a lot about keeping humans in the loop, and where's that balance between technology and humanity, and how can we as business leaders make strong decisions that support our companies and grow our companies, but also keep our teams and the people that we manage and that we lead at the forefront of things. And it's something that we are constantly kind of warning against and talking about. And I think he put it in a very poetic way, which I really appreciated. And I think, like you said, if you're not religious, or if you are religious, you're not religious, I do think from a morality perspective, a lot of what he said stands true. And I actually found a lot of parallels between what he wrote about, and also what was The Coming Age, was that Mustafa Suleiman book that we read. Mustafa Suleiman talks a lot about some of the topics that he brings up as well, kind of taking a slower approach to AI, thinking about politics and governments and states and the role that they play in AI. He warned about warfare as well, and he talks a lot about that concept of keeping humans in the loops, and maybe we need to take a step back before we just move forward so quickly, because the faster we move forward with AI, the faster we are leaving people behind, or we're reducing humans to efficiency and productivity, and kind of replacing the human in the whole aspect of it. So like I found it interesting having read now both to see the parallels between those two.
Yeah. And just using Mustafa as a jumping off point, the fact that this whole thing, because Mustafa, yeah, he founded DeepSeek, now works for Microsoft AI. That this document that the Pope presented, he presented alongside a co-founder of Anthropic. So I found that also an interesting way to kind of insert the church as a partner, because
Yeah.
again, this could be just like he could have released it on his own, like, okay, this is where the church taking a stand. But the fact that okay, I mean, he's partnering with one company, but the fact that he's talking and leads alongside a co-founder of Anthropic, which is one of the big firms globally for AI, Anthropic co-founder Christopher Olah. I feel that it's trying to keep the church in the conversation, keep the human in the loop, as we mentioned, and being a real partner. And I think the one analysis that why I'm mentioning this is one interesting analysis takeaway is the church he doesn't want to be a competitor to AI. So there is also like the one like a negative like analysis of this is that we've seen and we've reported stories in this that people are becoming overly attached to like AI
Oh,
companions.
yep.
So you can take that to the logical conclusion that people theoretically, again, extrapolating, I read a lot of fantasy sci-fi, that you could start worshiping AI, right? You're already
Yeah.
having a chatbot as a boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever friend, partner. But the logical conclusion is people could start worshiping AI, and people already lean on chatbots as a source of truth. And if you look at it from a business standpoint, and this is one article, I think it was a New York Times article, is with that mindset, AI could be a competitor because you're competing for a resource, which is human like attention. So the church needs to kind of like defend its territory in a way, and keep the followers and keep its flock. I guess is one way to look at it, and that's one way to maybe so I brought up like 2 points. Was one, releasing alongside Ola and keeping the human in the loop by partnering with Anthropic. But in the long term, it's also possibly the church is trying to stay relevant, stay part of the conversation, and because they're competing for attention. Just as like anyone else is nowadays, they're competing for donations and attention from AI.
Yeah, I mean, I speaking of competing for attention, I think it was really smart kind of on Anthropic's part, because now they've placed themselves just
Yeah,
mentally, like they've placed themselves in the forefront as like ethical AI,
yeah,
right? To align themselves with like the Pope and the church. And he's talking about morality and keeping human dignity, and Anthropic's right there beside him being like, yep, we support all of this. So I feel like from like a marketing PR like perspective, I think like, wow, great job Anthropic, because
yeah.
you're about to become a lot of people's like company to go to for like moral and conscious AI. um and yeah, like on your second point, I think that's so interesting about the concept of like fighting for the attention of
Mhm.
people
Yeah.
and trying to position yourself back in that conversation. Because I think that that's so valid and fair. And it's really interesting because in this encyclical, he also talks about sort of the relationship between like church and technology and development, and how like, the church welcomes technology and development, and how it's important to like drive societies forward, but it's also important to think about the impact on humanity and the role of humans and human relationships. And so I think it's really interesting because it's like a bit of both, because
Mhm.
yes, like you are really competing for attention from people, but again, like this is what a great way to get that intention back is to try and like try to what's the word I'm looking for? Like kind of like ping people's attention on
Yeah.
like this whole, because I feel like the world of AI is such a snowball. Like it's snowballing so fast, and it's kind of like an opportunity for them to ping and be like, hold on a second, like
Yeah.
if any, we know that people are going to listen to us, so let's talk about technology a little bit here. So I think that that's also interesting too, that he's like, this is a good time to talk about this revolution that's coming.
Yeah, and I think like they probably see it, from like look at me at a quasi business standpoint. Yeah, they see this rolling out, and they're trying to get ahead of it. And I mean, I applaud the church that they're taking the stance. I mean, you look at the, maybe like the old stereotypical church that they're, they have one stance, and this is like, like Middle Ages sort of like style of
Yeah,
church. But the modern church, it's more like, again, this is a framework. It's not really taking a specific stance. Like you said, it's working with the technology. Like the technology's here, so let's just put some, guardrails and some guiding principles, and we the church can be your partner for that moral. Okay, here's the framework, right? Like keep the people in it. Don't keep a human in the loop. Life is beautiful. Don't be create the Tower of Babel. I thought
yeah,
was interesting because that was one of the ones he mentioned, the Tower of Babel, which is the monoculture, right? So again, I'm just using the New York Times summary of this, but the Tower of Babel was, as we know it from language, right? Like everyone started speaking one language. So using that as an analogy for AI, using, as we know, it becomes like a just the most common denominator for some of these results. It's just like the averages. So don't use like an AI to just get the average, have independent thought. And I thought that was an interesting way to kind of use a biblical story of the Tower of Babel and then how that relates or could relate to AI. And then, of course, you can extrapolate this to other Bible concepts where, okay, it's a Bible story, but it's also just a lesson and a guiding principle. You don't have to be religious, but just
yeah.
to think critically about that. Like, yeah, you don't want to just default to whatever ChatGPT tells you to and have no independent thought. You want that diverse thought, which is kind of the Tower of Babel story. I think I'm, of course, generalizing
Yeah,
here, the
no, I
allegories. But
agree. Like,
yeah,
and I think what he does is he talks about sort of like two Bible stories, because he brings up the Tower of Babel, and then he brings up this other story of like the walls of Jerusalem falling, and there's this prophet who tries to like rebuild the walls, but then he gets like all the Jewish people involved, and they all kind of work together to build the wall together, and everyone has their own talents and gifts, and they do it together, and they're doing it for the right cause.
mm,
um and so he kind of is like, you can all like Babel just build a tower to get to the top without having any moral compass, or you can be like the group of people that have all come together for a good cause to rebuild the city. And you think about how the city is going to help each other and bring community together, and he kind of uses AI in that way. Like we can either build and design AI this way for this purpose, which is literally just more, right? Like
mm,
use it for more, to make more money, to be more efficient, and which doesn't really think about people at its core. Like more money and more efficiency, and you end up just like cutting out the need for people and supporting each other to move up, versus building and designing AI in a way that kind of like brings communities together. And he talks a lot about like the poor and those that have been like suffered a lot of injustice, basically. And
mm,
he's like, we have the opportunity to, if we're going to be building something new, technologies, we have the opportunity to provide access to everybody and
yeah.
education and learning to everybody. And so it's very like I love it so much, because I think it's like it's such a positive way to think about AI in the future. But I struggle because I feel like I see the realities, and I don't know if this is even possible. And people are inherently selfish, and
Yeah.
so is anyone actually going to take this and change or listen or feel like they've gotten a warning? I don't know. What do you think?
Yeah, no, with the other side of the coin is, yeah, like the easy articles that we could have said was the tech layoffs. Just this week, Meta had even more layoffs that they attribute to AI, and Meta was using, so, well, at least Meta was in the news this week of one of many companies that were in the news, but they were one of the big headline companies of, yeah, AI layoffs. So yeah, like, so where's the human in the loop, right? Like it's destroying tech sectors, but that's maybe all the more reason that we need to at least start the conversation. So that's at least it's the Pope, it's the Vatican, the Church, the Holy See, just trying to get people to consider like this stuff is not, yeah, it's not going away. Data centers are getting built, AI layoffs are decimating the tech industry. But on the bright side, like one of our news this week about AI backlash, we are sort of seeing a little bit of pushback. So I don't think it's all like we're never going away. One of the other news stories, Sam Altman was even changing his prediction on the AI job apocalypse, saying it maybe won't be as bad. So I think even there, maybe waking up a little bit to the fact that while we are, we're in this transition period still, so maybe not be the total job apocalypse, but we are in a definitely reset upheaval period, transition period, where yeah, some sectors are changing, and sort of like they mentioned this, the last encyclical about that was about jobs was Industrial Revolution, was like there's another encyclical. So again, a big change, Industrial Revolution, where humanity went to factories and it just changed the way of life back then. But of course, humanity kept going on, right? Like just the world adapted, and we're in that period right now. And again, bring this back to why is the church in here? Well, the church has been around the whole time, right? So at least it has a kind of moral center, not the whole time, but like from the Industrial Revolution, the last encyclical, where they trying to gave guiding principles. They released this encyclical about AI. So just another period of upheaval. We're going through that transition. Yes, it's going to suck apparently in the short term, but hopefully long term. Yeah, like to answer your question, yeah, I'm still kind of getting more positive, because I think we're still losing a lot of jobs and a lot of layoffs, but I do see like the positive notes with this AI backlash. I mean, you and I both, even though we're AI enthusiasts, I love my AI coding agent, but I am also trying not to use it outside of coding for every single thing. Like trying to use my own critical thinking more. So I'm
Yeah.
also adjusting. So I'm noticing that myself, where I think it's a very strong force multiplier for tasks like coding. It does
Yeah.
repetitive tasks super fast, faster than I could. But I don't necessarily want to use it for critical thinking tasks where I want to have my own unique thoughts.
100%. And I think what you bring up is great because it also actually connects back to something that is also in the encyclical. And he kind of talks about, or Pope Leo kind of talks about this concept. And I haven't seen this anywhere else. So let me know if you've seen this anywhere. But he kind of talks about this concept of like artificial intelligence. And, we think that it's not mimicking, it's, what does he say? It's not artificial intelligence, it's artificial imitation is kind of what he says. He talks a lot about like the dangers of equating AI with human intelligence, right? Because these are just machines that are imitating functions of human intelligence. And so like you're saying, like you don't want to let go of that human intelligence for yourself. Like there's so much that, like you said, like AI is great for imitating many of the things that yes humans do, but I think there is that balance, like you were saying, and he really does sort of talk. And I mentioned this at the beginning, but he calls for like a slower pace of AI development for that reason, because I think people are losing the plot on artificial intelligence, artificial imitation, and I kind of like the usage of artificial imitation more, because realistically, that is what it is at the end of the day. And I think that kind of thinking about AI in that way really changes sort of my feelings towards AI, and even those things that I kind of fear. I'm like, you know what? Yeah, it is just imitation.
Yeah.
So yeah, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. Obviously, I think it's I think we're aligned
Yeah.
on that. That it's especially when you learn the math behind it, like how AI. We talk about AI training, so just train the data. It's trained on existing data, so just regurgitating. As we mentioned, like the synthesis, the lowest come down there, the Tower of Babel, kind of all coming together of all its data has been trained on. That yes, it has a wide data source, more than any one human could possibly know, but at the same time, it's just giving you the average of what it's seeing and is making these connections based on just a math, right? It's finding the connections between concepts and ideas, which is a super cool technology. I think it's really great for some applications, but maybe not everywhere. And I think bringing the human back in the loop will slowly start transitioning there, but from the wider business world, I think there's still a little bit of pain to go through, probably the next couple of years.
Yeah, I think this has come at a great time because, we're starting to see that sort of idealized bubble of AI popping, and it's like, okay, what actually makes sense for AI? What doesn't make for sense for AI? I think in the future we want to talk a little bit about like costing as well. And so, yeah, so I think that now is the time for people to really be thinking about it, for business leaders to be thinking about what kind of impact we're really making on society, humanity, our business ecosystem as well. And I think it's important for people, regular users, to be thinking about what is your relationship with AI? And do you understand really what AI is and how it differs from like the human experience? So it's a good time to have this conversation around like AI and humanity. And yeah, so I think that this has been a great discussion too, just thinking about that.
Yeah, so as we kind of wrap up, and yeah, like I think the takeaway is, as you mentioned, I think leaders should be just at least aware of this, right? So read at least the summary. One article, yeah, again, there's a bunch of them, but New York Times had one called, yes, it's literally called just main takeaway from Pope Leo's Encyclical on AI. It gives a lot of the great talking points that we've discussed here in length. So do check those out. Any other resources, Patricia, or articles that you would point to specifically as like a leader in maybe not an AI company, but just any company who's, again, I think AI is infiltrating every sector. So I think this is broad, not just tech companies, but what would you recommend to any leader in business?
To be honest, I just check a lot of TikTok. Like because I think that's where people are. Like it's where people are sharing their thoughts, and so I do actually think it's important to hear the type of conversations that are happening on TikTok. Like I learned a lot about what people are thinking about this encyclical over there, and so I think where people are is where business leaders needs to be. I think we have formed ourselves a little bubble on LinkedIn when it comes to business leaders. And I think we're forgetting the reality of what these impacts mean to human life, everyday life, the loneliness that people feel, the anxiety and the fear and stress that people feel. And so I think that in the pursuit of efficiency, growth, and the bottom line, I agree. I don't think that we can let go of human dignity. And I do think that we all need to work together for the common good. And so, I hope that other business leaders and regular people feel that way as well. And I hope this resonates with them. And if it does, let us know. If it doesn't, let us know.
Yes, so share your thoughts as well. And thanks for listening to our discussion on this. Hope it was informative for you as a listener/viewer. And yeah, please leave us a comment and check back next week for more exciting topics on data and AI. Have a great week, everyone. Bye.